It is my honor to introduce John B. King Jr., the President and CEO of the Education Trust, a national nonprofit organization that seeks to identify and close educational opportunity and achievement gaps. John King served as the U.S. Secretary of Education in the Obama administration, and I'm so happy to have Secretary King with us here today. Please join me in welcoming Secretary John King.
Thanks so much, Laura, for that kind introduction. I'm grateful to you and Anne-Marie and the New America team for inviting me to be a part of the conversation today, and proud to follow Congressman Scott, who's just been such a phenomenal leader on early childhood education issues, including the very important resources coming through the American Rescue Plan. You know, as we think about this moment now, reflecting on the year since the pandemic began, I think it has become ever clearer to all of us that even before the pandemic, we were underinvesting in the systems and people that are essential to keeping our country running. And so as we think about this past year and the period pre-COVID, I think we have to be resolute that it's not good enough to go back to February 2020, that we actually have to think about what does it mean to build a more just and equitable future. And as we do that, of course, as Anne-Marie said, we need to be thinking about infrastructure. And that means rebuilding our roads. It means adapting to the consequences of climate change, but it also means investing in our care infrastructure, the care that we provide to our earliest learners, the care that we provide to folks with disabilities, the care that we provide to older adults. We've got to think about that as central to our infrastructure. And we have to acknowledge that that infrastructure was not strong enough even before COVID. We did a study at the Ed Trust looking at preschool participation, focused particularly on pre-K3 and pre-K4 and state-funded pre-K programs. And what we found in state after state is that we aren't providing consistent access to high quality pre-K3, pre-K4 programs. In fact, when we looked at the data, what we found is that only about 1% of Latino children and only about 4% of African-American children were enrolled in high quality state-funded pre-K programs. That's a real challenge for us to grapple with as a country. We also know that 60% of Latino families live in childcare deserts, as is also true for 3 out of 5 families in rural areas. Again, before COVID, our care infrastructure around our earliest learners was not strong enough. And so we've got to build something better as we look ahead. We also know that even in the places that aren't childcare deserts, still access is a problem because of cost. I think about in DC, childcare is more expensive than college in 33 states. In DC, oftentimes childcare can cost more than housing. Think about that. So as we think about strengthening our social infrastructure, we've got to think about how do we ensure that families have access to paid family leave? How do we ensure that they have access to affordable, high quality childcare, 0 to 4? And how do we ensure that that care is affordable, particularly for high needs communities that too often don't have access to care? How do we make sure that care is affordable for working adults who are trying to go back to school and trying to balance college and childcare? So that's the work that we have to do together. As we do that work, we've got to be attentive to investing in our early childhood workforce. When I was secretary, we did a report looking at compensation for our early childhood workforce. And just as Joan mentioned in the video, Joan Lombardi mentioned in the video, we have these huge gaps between what we pay teachers in our kindergarten and first grade classrooms versus the teachers who are working with children 0 to 4. That is a problem. It is also a problem that almost half of the early education workforce relies on public assistance. It's a problem that more than 1 in 6 female childcare workers lives below the poverty line. And we know that our early childhood workforce is disproportionately made up of women, 40% folks of color. And so if we want to address racial equity as a society, we have to address equitable compensation and support for our workforce. They also talked in the video about all the research we have on our youngest learners, on babies and infants, and how much their brains are developing. And yet, those are often the folks in our early childhood workforce who are most poorly compensated. As we think about that workforce, we also have to make sure that we're investing in the development of our early childhood workforce. We worked on a report at the Education Trust with NACE, looking at efforts to improve professional development in states for the early childhood workforce. And one of the things that struck us was that often those improvements aren't coming with investment. Too often places are raising credential bars without investing in access to professional development, paid time for folks to participate in that professional learning, subsidies for them to attend courses. And what we heard from the folks we interviewed, largely folks of color who are working in the early childhood workforce, what we heard over and over again was, I want to do everything I can to help support my babies. I want to learn everything I can to help support my babies, but I need support in doing that. One educator said to us, financially support us so we can continue to get our education. We're not saying we don't want to do it. We need support. Another said, if you want me to go back to school, you want me to go out and do practicums, find money, find a way so it's not coming out of my pocket. So we've really got to invest in our early childhood workforce. We've also got to strengthen the connections between early childhood and K-12, particularly those early grades. We need to make sure those educators are connected, talking to each other, sharing ideas and information. We've really got to pay attention to the science of reading and ensuring that in our early grades, we are building on the language skills that students are carrying with them from early childhood education. We've got to focus on seeing the fact that kids may speak a language other than English at home as an asset, not a deficit. We've got to invest in expanding dual language opportunities in the early childhood space. We've got to invest in a bilingual workforce. We've got to attend to the services we're providing to students with disabilities. We have a paper coming out soon at EdTrust focused on IDEA Part C, and we talked to Part C coordinators around the country, and we're worried that we're seeing a decline in referral rates, an increase in waiting times, a decrease in services for families. And so we've really got to make sure that we leverage these new American Rescue Plan dollars to support families through the early intervention process. Ultimately, Anne-Marie emphasized the power of relationships, and I want to close there. The relationships, the socio-emotional development of our children 0 to 4 is crucial. It's crucial for their long-term health and well-being. We know being in quality early learning programs leads to higher rates of high school graduation, college matriculation, college graduation, success in the workforce. Jim Heckman has shown better health outcomes long-term if you're in quality early childhood programs. We're about to have this infrastructure conversation as a country. We've got to see the care infrastructure, the relationship infrastructure as central to how we ensure our long-term prosperity and well-being. Again, thrilled to be here for this conversation. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Secretary King, for your catalytic words and really the call to action. We greatly appreciate you being here.